So I'm kind of the skunk at the garden party here. I'm with Libertas Alberta. There's brochures and stuff in the back. I don't want to waste any time because Mr. Hozak gave me a generous 15 minutes of time to do a presentation that normally takes an hour and a half. So I've obviously greatly abridged it. And I'm speaking in favor not of what we have for equalization, but the concept and the fact that we can fix it, and not just fix it, but make it better to the point that it actually makes this country a better country. So once he finds my presentation, which, does he see it right there? Right, I'm looking right at it. Right there. Okay, cool. So let's get it fired up. So independence if necessary, but not necessarily independence. Now what? And my next slide, basically it says equalization. The whole presentation is equalization, how it works, because a lot of people really don't understand it, and I won't get into that too deep because we got a pretty smart audience here, and I think people.
Gord, just excuse me for 1 second. You don't have to worry. We have a little bit of extra time.
Okay.
So you've got your full 15 minutes from when it starts working.
Thanks, man. What's that called? Like bonus? It's like Congress where they give you extra time at the mic. You get your. So can we move on to the next slide if that's okay? Cool. How it works, why it doesn't work, and I'll spend a fair bit of time on that. And I'll briefly go through how we think here at Libertas we might be able to fix it and frankly, in large ways, save this country. Next slide. So I don't know how many people in this room have been to Quebec City, flown into Quebec. Pretty good chunk. Beautiful city. One of my favorite places to drink and do other things. But as you fly in, you might have looked out the window and you've seen this. And now if we can go to the next slide. This is a suburb just outside of Quebec. What do you see in everybody's backyard? Swimming pools. Quebec City is further north than where we are today. Quebec City, Quebecers have the highest pool ownership in the world, except for Florida. And I know they'll argue it's a lifestyle thing. I will argue it's because they have ridiculously cheap hydropower. Those pools are heated with electricity. Most of them are cheap above ground pools, but that's how plentiful they are. And by getting the cheap power, Quebec avoids paying equalization to the tune of $8.5 to $13 billion until you do. So you are paying to heat Quebecers' swimming pools. Okay, so let's understand what's going on here. It is broken. Next slide. But for me, Canada is all about vowels. E, triple E, EI, and A. E being equalization, I'll talk about that today. But Libertas is working on what are we doing with an equal elected and effective Senate. In my opinion, this country will not survive unless we do something in that regard. And then unemployment insurance is probably one of the most sinister programs in the country after equalization, in that it's another imputed transfer that actually doubles down on the wrong that is the equalization formula. And that's a big part of what I'm going to present today. And the last thing is A, which is accountability. And this country obviously lacks it because we have a joker named Justin Trudeau in power and a few other things. So let's fix the vowels, and by doing that, we fix Confederation. Next slide. So how many people thought they were going to see a picture of Pierre Trudeau at this session? There are three, it's not a trilogy. What is it, the Holy Ghost and all that stuff? Trinity. There's a trinity of antichrists in my world. That's one right there. The lovely lady next to her, I don't need to tell you who that is. And the point being is this is part of our Constitution. The equalization is enshrined in the Constitution. So if anybody says we just have to get rid of it, we can't just get rid of it. We have to do something in the Constitution if you truly want to do that, but I think there's a better way. Anyway, so we had Pierre Trudeau and 9 premiers, with a notable exception, signed off on it. Next slide. So the formula today, and I'll be brief on this, only looks at one thing: government revenues, essentially fiscal capacity and how it's calculated. I won't get into that today. But what happens is there are really perverse incentives caused by that. Obviously, we just talked about the swimming pool debacle, and hopefully I hope that's a takeaway for most people today. And let's move on to next slide. An extreme example. Now, you might have noticed, and if you've been drinking with me, you certainly know this already, I am a Newfoundlander. Or was, I guess. I'm an economic refugee living in Alberta. And I'm going to give you an example that I know personally about. It is extreme, I'll grant you, but it is not rare. And we're going to flash back 13 years, next slide, to another antichrist in my world, and that's that piece of crap on the bottom there. Anybody know who that is? Danny Williams. The third one, by the way, is Joey Smallwood. So 2 Newfies and a Quebecer. So in 2006, Newfoundland was the biggest per capita beneficiary of equalization, to the tune of 49% of the entire provincial budget was equalization transfers, working out to about $2,400 per capita. Next slide. So let's look at the crab fishery. I'm going somewhere here, don't worry. That's a map of Newfoundland. All those little dots there are where the crab are caught, the largest landings, if you will. You can see that, I don't know if you can see that little gray line, the 200-mile limit. A lot of it is done literally outside the boundaries of the 200-mile limit. Next slide. And they're doing it in boats this size, 200 miles out. If you guys think rodeo riders are brave, come and see some of my friends who go out in that middle picture there, 220 nautical miles out, a 6-hour helicopter ride from search and rescue. And good luck getting pulled off a boat in weather like that. So we have a crab industry. And by the way, I have to say this. I don't know if there's any Newfoundlanders. That middle boat, I know it's not a crab boat. I know it's a dragger. Let's move on. Okay? So the crab processing plant in Newfoundland operates while they're harvesting the crab, but there's something called soft shell. So the crab are hard shell, and that's when they get harvested, but they molt their shell. And let's say it happens early, and this does happen. So the crab plant opens up, they get 3 weeks of operations going, and then the crab soft shell happens, and the fishery's over. Okay? And just by the way, Newfoundland has 2 times the world's capacity for crab. They could produce the world's harvest of crab twice over just in the plants in Newfoundland. Next slide. So, Newfoundland has a problem now. We've got 3 weeks worth of work. In order for Newfoundlanders to get on EI, they need 10. The legendary 1042. Songs have been written about it. Yes, yes, no, no, yes, no, yes. That was how you filled in your form. It was all very well understood. So the problem is these guys have 3 weeks. If they're going to stick around in Newfoundland, they're going to have to go on welfare. Welfare is a provincial program. So what do we got to do? How do we get these guys off of the provincial dole and onto the federal dole, onto your dole? So what they do is they create and they lose equalization to the tune, if they move. If that family of 4 moves to Fort Mac or wherever, they're going to lose almost $10,000 in equalization transfers. So they can't lose these guys. Let's move on to the next slide, if we can. So what does the government do? Set up a make work project that runs exactly 7 weeks. And they can't do anything productive. We can't do something that actually benefits anybody. So we'll build a tourist trail somewhere in Lameline, which is the middle of goddamn nowhere, okay? That nobody will ever walk on. Or clear brush along the roadsides, but of course we can't use chainsaws or anything efficient. We'll use axes and hand saws. Truly make work project. Now how does that impact their self-respect? What do you think happens there? Not good. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. So, the provincial government buys 7 weeks worth of work, which they only pay half of because, remember, equalization's paying 49% or whatever it is of their bowl. So they buy 3.5 weeks worth of minimum wage employment for these people. Next slide. And they get back, well, the individual gets 42 weeks of EI, right? And most of that is funded by us because we're contributing and not collecting. How many people here in this room have been on EI this year? I can go into rooms in Newfoundland where 95% of the people will raise their hand. So let's move on. So, what does the province get? Well, they get to tax on all the money that's spent with an EI check, and it gets blown at the Legion or wherever. And they also get to charge HST, which at the time was 15%. And assuming the crab plant worker and a spouse and 2 kids, they get to keep $10,000 worth of equalization. So there's your incentive to keep people in place, pay them, have them do menial labor to maintain equalization. Let's move on. Yep. So there's a massive incentive to underemploy people. I won't get into the painful experiences I've had with that. And there's a priority placed on maximizing the number of employees, not maximizing net government revenues, not maximizing economic growth, because that's counterproductive, because that raises your revenues as a province. And what does that do? Gets clawed back in equalization. So we have this whole vicious circle, and we have provinces like Manitoba, Quebec, Newfoundland, who game the system. Manitoba is a massive gamer of this system too, by the way, in the same way Quebec does. Let's move on. So, sorry, back up just one sec. You're okay with that? Sorry, we skipped one. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Sorry, where are we? My slide order mixed up? Okay, there's that one. We got that one done. Next one. So there's a huge incentive to underemploy. And of course, they're playing games with resources provincially, both renewable and non-renewable. Newfoundland blew an entire, massive billions of dollars with Hibernia by hiring workers instead of retaining earnings. Let's move on. So, renewable resources. Somehow my slides got mixed up. But sorry, they're included in the formula. But in the case of Quebec, right? Quebec Hydro plays games with it, right? Right now, if I understand it, Quebec Power is charged to its local citizens around 5 cents, and they could sell it to Vermont for 35. So that's the kind of scam that's going on. And there's an argument made that Alberta should privatize part of its oil industry, produce gasoline, and give it to its citizens, because that would reduce our equalization transfer. That's how perverse it is. So let's move on to how we fix this. So it's broken. Does everybody agree equalization is broken? Does everybody agree that equalization, if it keeps going, is going to tear this country even further apart than it already is? So how do we fix it? Let's not talk about getting rid of it. I see a thumb down. I disagree wholeheartedly that. I think there's a way to turn equalization into a great generator of unity across the country. Let's move on. First off, we're not just going to look at revenues. We're going to look at spending. So if you're a spendy province, you're going to pay a price for that. And then we're going to provide a vehicle for wealthy provinces with more revenues or potential for revenues than they need to spend, give them a place to put it in a savings to create a future endowment that can grow to the trillions of dollars and take care of millennia's worth of Canadians, not just today. So, let's move on. Spending. So, $5 daycare was always the buzzword, right? I think we know now it's swimming pools, if you want to really piss people off, right? But let's look at all spending, and this is a bit of a scam too, right? Is the city of Toronto probably spends more money than the province of Alberta does. So let's look at how spendy those guys are, because that's not in the formula as I understand it. Sorry, it's not in formula because it's spending. So let's look at all the things they spend it on: provincial, municipal, interest payments, debt payments, all of that stuff. Your fiscal provincial house, let's look at it all. Now, contributions to your endowment, that RSP, provincial RSP, if you will, that's exempt from the calculation. So if you put money away in savings, that's not going to be part of the calculation. So there's an incentive to save. How many people think government politicians today feel any incentive to save? None. If there's an equalization that we could put money into, and you decide you want to spend it on some project that you have as a politician, you got to explain it to your voters as to why you're taking money from their grandkids. Let's move on. Revenue. This is a biggie, of course. We look at all federal taxes and fees, everything basically, and I want the fourth point for interest of time: net Crown Corp revenues. And that means if Quebec Hydro wants to sell their power to their local consumer for 5 cents, but they could sell it for 35 on the market, we're going to gross that up. We're going to say, no. You want to give it away, you guys can pay for it. We're not paying for it. Right? So if you're making, all the other things, I'm just trying to skip through here as best I can, sorry. And, of course, if you did have an endowment that grew to a certain size and you needed to take some money or wanted to take some money out, that endowment withdrawal would go into your revenue spending. I think we follow that, okay? We're okay with that? Let's move on. And the savings account, this is key, and I believe this is what can make equalization. As a Newfoundlander, nothing more humiliated me, frankly, to see Danny Williams piss away Hibernia. There's another slide I haven't got here where they were taking 50 cents on a barrel was the royalty. They could have gotten 15, but they wanted the developers, Mobil and Petro-Canada, to build a gravity-based structure for $5 billion that didn't need to be built, but it meant 15,000 man-years of work in Newfoundland. So they forego Hibernia's windfall, because if they had taken the windfall, they would have lost it all to equalization. So if they had an endowment vehicle, they could have said, we'll take the windfall and we'll put it into our endowment, and we won't have it impacted in equalization. How am I doing for time there, Danny? We're okay? 5? Okay, let's move on. Next slide, if we could. So the spendy part, let's move on just to the next slide. Keep going. Oh yeah, we'll look at stumpage fees too. BC actually plays games there, giving away their crown assets. I don't know if anybody's seen that, is it Google's trying to build a huge development in Toronto, and the city of Toronto is going to get paid $15 billion for the land? We should put that in the equalization formula. That's an asset, isn't it? I think it's an asset. Okay, move on. This little chart here. But basically, if you're a high revenue province, but you're a spendy province, you're going to get clipped both ways. You're going to pay an extra amount because you're spendy, and you're going to take an extra amount because you're taxing your citizens too much and not putting it away. If you're a low tax, low spend province, maybe you get some equalization. The thing is, we need to create proper incentives, accountability to the provinces, not just for today, and not just to their voters today, but their future generations. Don't squander the assets. Don't piss it away. I'm always tempted. Palestinians, there's a saying about Palestinians. Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And I think Canada are the Palestinians of the developed world. We constantly miss opportunities to be better, that we are not head and shoulders the wealthiest jurisdiction in the world, not by a little bit, is a great scandal and frankly a sin to the rest of humanity. And I think equalization can provide the mechanisms done properly where we have an incentive to be the best and richest that we can be. Next slide. So if we do that, is there an incentive to maximize resource revenues? Yes. Get the royalties, put them away in the endowment, away you go. To reduce spending, yes, if I spend less, I might get more equalization or have to make less transfers. Reduce taxes, same thing. If I don't tax overburden my citizens, it actually improves our status in equalization. An incentive to not keep people in an unproductive place. You're not going to be doing workfare programs to keep people in moving rocks from one side of a road to another. And that is a soul-destroying thing. So let's move on. This is a quote from a song I quite like, and I think it's very much in tune with what this room is about, is that at some point in a relationship, and we're talking Canada here, is you get so sick of the fighting, you lose your fear in the end. Now, I think a lot of people in this room have already lost their fear, and I think more and more Albertans and Saskatchewanians and central or interior BC people as well are losing their fear of the idea that we become independent. But I think there are ways and mechanisms, and we got to fight hard, I grant you. We have to come up with ideas and solutions to keep Canada together. But if that fails, so be it. Thank you.